Hello and welcome to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. I'm Dylan. I'm your host, joined by my blue collar badass, Matt. 2 weeks in a row, man. What are we doing?
It feels like a new thing. This is awesome. I'm loving it. We need to keep up this streak. It's way more
Yeah,
fun talking to you than just talking to myself.
I feel you, man. Lately I've just turned on the Zoom recording so that I see myself whenever I record, so that I'm at least, looking at somebody.
You're like, who is that handsome devil I'm talking to?
It's like, oh shit, I need a haircut.
Yeah, man, it's good
Oh,
though. It's good to be back.
yeah, it is, man. How's construction going in your world?
It is good. We are going like gangbusters still. We're kind of in that end of the marathon sprint where it's a mad race to get things closed in before the white shit starts flying. Um, we had flurries here this week, and it's just the weather's been just terrible. If it's not flurries, it's been raining and just brutally cold. But it's good. It's par for the course. We do it every year, right? It's just people ask all the time, like, how the hell do you build up there? How do you build so fast, and how do you get things done? And it's just it's what we know. If you don't get the windows in and the roof on before November, you're in a world of hurt. So we're racing to get things closed up. But as far as the market goes, man, it's reassuring, right? Like, we are on the pre-construction side, we're busier than ever. I had a good call with one of my steel guys today, and he was relaying some information he got from a Nucor call he sat in. And Nucor, who is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, steel suppliers around in the country, they're expecting a bit of a slowdown in Q4 and a bit of a slowdown in Q1. But keep in mind, a bit to them is nothing. But after that, they see it all coming right back. There's still such a huge demand out there. The labor problem has not gotten any better. So in terms of work and future outlook, I think it looks pretty good comparatively to what we're hearing and what's going on in politics.
Well, and I think so. It's important to note that, especially for Nucor, they're a publicly traded company. So he was listening to their earnings call. So when you listen to those, right, they've got to disclose anything that they see on their radar for investors. So there's a lot of other financial governance that goes around earnings calls. So when we talk about that, we have to understand that they have to disclose it. So even if it's 1-2% slowdown, they have to disclose that that's what their orders for December, January are, which or whatever it is, right? 5%, 10%, they have to disclose that on their earnings call. And so for them, and remember, a year ago, 18 months ago, when we talked about steel, is Nucor is still probably trying to catch up to current orders. They probably still have a massive backlog. So what they're talking about in slowdown is in orders coming in, because people have to put deposits down, so that affects financials and cash flow probably for the next whatever 6 months on their backlog for Nucor. And we got to remember too, Nucor does some structural pieces. A lot of their stuff is tube steel, flat steel, pipe, and then they do some dimensional steel. So again, important to remember what Nucor does, their backlog, and from financial earnings calls. I know you guys didn't come here to learn about finances and 10Ks and quarterly earnings calls, but important to note when we talk about that type of stuff. Same thing if you look at like Jacobs or AECom, they're publicly traded companies. They have to disclose a lot of that stuff on their earnings calls.
Yeah, and it's just good. It's good info to know, right? It's good to keep up on that sort of thing. I mean, we track commodities constantly. You and I talk about it, more than we probably should, but it's good to have a pulse on these things, because when you start looking at the dire forecast for the U.S. economy, and you start listening too much to the news channels and all the pundits, you're bound to go crazy if you believe even half of what they say. But if you get down to actual what matters, and that's in my world, in your world, that's commodity grade steel. That's what drives most everything. And when you see those guys not sweating, that it's a little reassuring. Don't get me wrong. I think we're in for a bumpy ride for the next little while here, but we're getting our orders in for steel tonnage in Q1. I can promise you that.
And that's just it. So, for all you guys out there, it's important to follow the commodities market and then understand how like oil and stuff gets traded, right? When OPEC makes a announcement on production, even though it's not going to take effect for 30, 60, 90 days, whatever they, decide or disclose, that affects the market price today because they bake in future output into today's market price, which everyone always forgets that that's how a market gets set, is based on future production or outlook, right? So if it's a bleak outlook, right, a share price drops not on what today's dollars are, right? If they change their earnings call to where in the future they're going to do worse, then the share price drops of a given stock. And then same on commodities market, right? If they foresee future prices going up, then today's price increases along with that. So really important to know like how the market actually moves and what the market set is. And then gas stations reflect future price today, not what they bought gas for. Right. So like they bought, whatever, a tanker of gas, say it's like 350 a gallon or whatever it is. I'm just going to use this as an example. So it's 350 a gallon is what they bought it for. They're going to sell it for 360, right? They don't have a ton of markup in their deal, or maybe 10%. So 385 is what they sell it for on price. And then but at the same time, they could do it the other way, right? Where the market dictates 385, but then at the time that they bought it, but in 2 weeks or whatever to get through that tanker, prices dropped to 325. So now they're losing 25 cents on every gallon that they sell for that. So we have to remember like how this works in the real world. I know this gets like real complicated real quick in dealing with market adjusted prices, but they bought gas at a certain price and then they sell it based on the market, and that fluctuates every day at the pumps.
They got to mix the high with the low and come out somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
It's really any retail does that.
Right. And gas stations really don't make their money on gas. They make it on, the soda, the Gatorade, the chips,
Twinkies and
the
cigarettes.
cigarettes, alcohol. Like
Yeah.
that's where they make their actual money. So important to know those things, guys. And again, we're not really gonna turn this show into a commodities talk show on construction, but it's a big factor in what goes into pricing, from fuel to lumber to steel to everything else that we talk about and go through for construction. Again, as architects and engineers, I think we are so disconnected from price. It's good to remember, in kind of the guidance that we need to give our clients on these things, do matter.
Yeah, I won't keep harping on it, but I had a call today, a sales call, and it was my stereotypical why I love design build, and it makes it so easy to sell because this institution hired a local architecture firm, told them what they wanted. Firm designed this pretty picture. They went and validated a budget, and it was like 3 or 4 times what these people can afford. And they found me. I was telling you before we recorded, they actually saw my sign of all things, which rarely ever happens. And they called and said, "Hey, how does this design build thing work? Can you fix this problem?" And it's like, well, hell yes, you've come to the right place.
Yeah, I mean, so often, like for architects, engineers, like everything's done on a square footage basis, and that square footage numbers from 10 years ago, not today dollars, and especially not, day-to-day market pricing. So, it's such an old number on what you can actually build things for.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing estimates constantly, and that kind of ties in with what we want to talk about today. But we are constantly doing conceptual based estimates, and in order to do so effectively and to be safe and not like throw away the farm, we're constantly updating our unit rates, constantly polling our specialty contractors and everyone to make sure that the numbers we're using are correct today, because especially in this market, the last 2 years, man, it's been nuts, to say the least, trying to be competitive and not lose your shirt. It all just kind of boils down to who you know, and how organized and efficient you can keep things. But the work that goes into putting together an estimate on any level really is pretty great. And if we're going to put in that work and not have accurate data to back it up, it's for nothing. And that's where I think we're going to probably get into, but it's a process.
Yeah, and I think the thing that goes into it is when we start talking about quality, when we start talking about actual production, right? Actual construction in our case is, and even somewhat on the design side is, if you're gonna, you set a price, right? And in some cases, a client really doesn't want to pay for, in some cases, design, which, okay, fine, but you're gonna get, a lesser quality, right? Quick, fast, cheap, good, right? What do you want? You got to pick two. So in a lot of this, they want it fast, they want it good, and they want it cheap. Well, that's not a recipe for success. Somebody's going to shortcut something somewhere, and often it's in quality. And so on the quality piece, we need to make sure that in design, like there's certain things that have to be upheld, right? There's certain codes, certain standards, certain information that has to be relayed. And really, in a project, there's a certain amount of setup that you're just not going to get away from, right? All the accounting setup, all the project setup, the initial paperwork, all the time that goes into it. And there's going to be really a fixed fee no matter what, just to start a project. And that goes for anybody, contractors, architects, engineers, doesn't matter. And from there, then it's on the rest of the quality of work. What do you need? There are minimums that have to be done both on the construction and the design side. And I think that sometimes, and this again goes to a lot of us in educating the client. I think more and more that I am in this industry, that we talk about this, that I hear from other architects and engineers now that I speak to a lot more of them than, when I was just in one firm and my own experience. I have, again, I'm in a kind of a neutral seat, if you will, and I'm not threatening anybody. And so they feel like they can talk to me. Is you hear everybody go through these same type of issues, and it really comes down to more and more that I see it is client education and making sure that the client understands what they're getting, right? A lot of our clients are not, based on the ins and outs of construction, contracts, how things are done. I've had one in all my experience that was on top of it and really understood and knew the process. They were over, $300 million a year budget for healthcare. So, and they've been in the industry for 25 years doing the exact same thing in capital projects. But that's like the only owner that I've ever had that really, really knew what they were doing, ins and outs. Most people are, first timer or even in higher education where they do a decent amount of construction. Um, a lot of their stuff is in capital projects planning, not in capital projects execution. And that's kind of where, they know what they're doing, and but they don't do it every day versus somebody like in a healthcare setting where they're in charge of a whole healthcare system, that was doing just a lot of work on a daily basis, and, contract and construction issues, problems, contract sending. So I know it's a roundabout way of saying that we need to educate our clients, but I think that's really where a lot of this ends up starting.
So on the design side of the table, if you go, especially if you go the old school way, right? Design, bid, build. When a client first approaches you with a concept or with a need or whatever it may be, at what point do you start applying fee to your output? Like, does this happen on day one I assume you go and meet with them first without sending them a bill, but at what point does the ticker start running and the dollar value start going up?
So let's take I mean, there's a few ways this can run, but let's take school, because those are typically like that's a pretty straightforward process. So school, gets a bond, they go out for um they go through the whole hiring process of an architect engineer. They have, let's say it's a $20 million project, and then they go through the whole interview process. And then once they select their architect design team, then a contract gets set at whatever percentage fee that they agree upon. 5, 6, 7, 10%, whatever it is that they decide upon. And then from there, it's set that you're paying this much for a $20 million building for design. And then, which we'll get into this in a minute, but is ad fees on, like, they want to add a wing or they found an extra $5 million. Then, contracts typically get renegotiated on that additional, design for their additional wing or whatever. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but that's typically like so that's how a school project would go. For like the healthcare projects that I was on, we pretty much had pre-negotiated fees. So like this one, we had a master service agreement that we signed to like get into it, and then pretty much everything was pre-negotiated on fees for the project, and then they would give us, whatever the budget was, and then we would, basically invoice based on that. So we'd sign like a one-page amendment to the, deal, and it all flowed through the architect because we were the MEP firm. So then we would invoice the architect on whatever our portion of that was. And again, all that was pretty much pre-negotiated. For other projects, like a one-off, entrepreneur designs a building, it'd be pretty much the same thing. Budget gets set, like how much do you have to spend on XYZ building, right? What are you looking for? We'll kind of tell you what, ballpark we think it would be in. And then, a percent fee gets applied to that, right? It's not dollars for hours, it's fee percentage on project, right? 5, 6, 7%, whatever it is of construction cost. But it gets pre-negotiated. So then any escalation, because it's a lump sum fee of whatever, and then a payment schedule over the course of the project, right? SD, DD, CD, CA, on a monthly basis would be like the billing schedule for a project.
So that makes sense. It's totally different than how we can operate, right? Especially doing what we do, and we're kind of, tip of the spear in the design build world. We get a lot of clients or a lot of prospects that come to us and they have no idea what to do, period. They don't know what a building costs. They don't know the process. They don't know the design process. Some of them don't even know how much they can afford. If we're being honest here, we get a lot of people who come to us kind of trying to figure that out. But there's this age old problem we have, and it stems from the residential industry of doing free estimates, right? And you see it on like all the replacement window companies, right? They'll come to your home and give you a free estimate, and they'll do free this and free that, and it's really just a high pressure sales tactic is what you end up with. But a lot of that has kind of transferred and has always been held in the commercial world too. And people expect to get a free estimate. They expect us to go and do our thing and put a package together for no charge. It's interesting. It's an interesting conundrum, right? And we've found some ways to approach it, and we don't always do it, right? We typically won't do free estimates on most projects unless there's a reason. So we set up pre-construction agreements, which is in a roundabout way similar to the fee structure you just mentioned. And there's a set dollar value, and within that value, we're going to provide X, Y, and Z. And within that X, Y, and Z is, a fully designed building, a budget, schedule, all that good stuff. And 8 times out of 10, we have no issues getting those agreements signed. And then they're set up so that if the project fails, right, if it reaches a point of no return, then I get to make my designers whole. I keep a little bit for, our estimating time. Anyone who puts puts some skin into the project gets paid back, and nobody makes a lot of money doing that, but at least it's kind of an insurance policy. And it's not often that you see that out there, I guess, in our world. So I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are on taking that approach. And it's not, like I said, it sounds kind of like what you do or what we're doing in the design world, but it's just a little different spin on it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the difference in dealing, like we dealt primarily with institutions, right? We
Sure.
didn't deal with, like, I mean, on occasion, so like only one firm that I was in did we deal with, uh we did anything for a buck, kind of. It was when I was in Louisville, and we would, take on, entrepreneurs and businesses, that had like one owner. And frankly, those projects ended up being it was not what we were good at. Because so we were a full service AE firm, structure, civil, architecture, interiors, and those projects end up being more like the extension of the owner's home than like let us design this for like commercial office space or, corporate spaces, right? Schools, hospitals, offices for corporations, versus like this is their new HQ for whatever. And that's just, it's a different hand holding exercise that if you're not in that world all the time becomes very like cumbersome, and a lot of babying the client, for lack of a better term, but that's pretty much what it is. So for us in dealing with institutions, it was all very straightforward. And then the old adage went, the best project was the one that never got built, because we got paid. There was no change orders. There was no, liability. There was no nothing, right? We got paid for design, and it just never got built. So, and institutions are very good about like understating that whole gamut of what goes into it, of like, people have to stamp, seal, sign, have liability in the whole thing. And again, it goes to like owner education of like when you're dealing with these entrepreneurs or business owners, to where like they have, this is their first building ever. They don't know a lick about construction. They don't know about time frames. They think, we can crack dirt tomorrow. Um, and they get very rudely awakened to this. And I've seen it like in Arte, like people do construction projects and like, they're like, why does all this happen? And they get, all flustered about it. It's like, dude, calm down first. Two, I'm going to come to the defense of the contractor and the engineer, like in that they were probably right. They probably did the right thing. And you just have no idea about like the speed of which these projects move, right? You need one person to come in and then the next. And like, what did you hold up? Did you not give them answers? Like, for somebody that's never done construction, I'm going to fall to the defense of architect and engineer because they've done this a time or two. So, I think really it's in what you're going through, with those one-off architects, engineers, it's to have that 2 3 hour meeting up front with them is like the advice that I would give. And like, hey, this is how the process goes. Or, you do some videos and like, this is how the process goes. This is how, construction works. This is, what needs to happen. Here's the, you know, permitting time, right? Like to get through all the permits. And, just be aware we could take 6 months to get them because the planning commissioners are a bunch of idiots and they don't know what the hell they're looking at. Like I'm doing right now with the city of Irvine, where we did permits for stuff. And I came into the project, I'm just drawing it because I can and it doesn't need to be signed and sealed. But like, they argued with against occupancy rates for us. They wanted to go assembly in like a retail type space. And it's like, this is not an assembly. This is in a strip mall. Do you understand like the ramifications of going from like office space to assembly space? Like, and I would need 200 bathrooms in this 3,500 square foot space, to do that. And so like people just don't understand. And it's taken us, again, 6 months to get through permitting, or maybe a year at this point, because they don't know what they're looking at. And and I think it's really sitting down with owners and walking them through like, look, this is how it goes. This is what you're paying for. These are the heartaches. And, if you would like to do this on your own, please feel free. But this is what you pay us for, is to handle these heartaches, these problems, these like, and just walk them through all these examples of like, do you want to go to, town council meetings in the middle of nowhere or drive 3 hours, and do this 6 times? Like, no, you don't. Like, you really don't want to do this. So that's what we do. This is how we handle it. We've done this a time or two. And if you would like to fill out paperwork for the next 3 months, please be my guest. Oh, do you know what they need? No. Have you ever read the International Building Code? What is that? I don't understand. Do you know what life safety codes are? No, I have no idea. Okay. Like, that's what we're here for. And people just don't know, right? They think of their house and a builder and, I want 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a, jacuzzi tub. Okay, got it. Right.
Exactly. Yes, they don't know what they don't know, and it's our job to educate them. I think you kind of mentioned the video idea. That we don't need to get into marketing, but that is a hugely powerful tool that we don't use enough, but I think we could, to kind of cut down on that education process where, when we don't want to be there in person for 3 hours to explain, just the very basics of what we do and how we can help, to be able to put that into a video and get it in front of a prospect, I think would be pretty powerful. Not in place of in-person conversation by any means, but in addition to it, maybe a precursor to that meeting.
Yeah, it's just framing all of it. And this, I mean, while we're on the topic of bitching about owners, is because this is what I think the biggest heartache, across architect and contractor ultimately is, right? Design and construction is the owner, right? Either they're gonna be a help or a hindrance. And I think for a lot of it is, and then the owners don't help when they pit us against each other. And it's like, dude, we're both here to complete a project and we want what's best. I've been on one job site where, a contractor was actually, a real hindrance, and we would have thrown them off. We just didn't have anybody to replace them. So that's what we dealt with. But like, I've never really, other than that one out of the hundreds of jobs that I've been on, have we had a contractor that was actually adversarial, right? Like, most everything that we've been on, like, everybody wanted what was in the best interest of the owner. They wanted to do good work. And then we get pitted against each other for no good reason. Which again is why design build works, is in the way that you're doing it, is one contract holder, one
Right.
one guy, and you're owning both sides of it. And again, most design build worlds, that's not how they actually do them. It is, they run them design bid build, whether they say that or not. That's how I've always been on those design build projects. Um, so, but
Good marketing slogan.
yeah, I mean, they just, we'll get into that at another point. Because it really irks me, like, that, how they did it, and then it screws up the contracts, and we have no ramification against the um, contractor in those cases of them screwing stuff up, because we are contractually bound to them, not to the owner. So that's how that works. But is in really in doing this free shit, right, for people, is, I think, it extends more than just design work, right? And one, people don't value design. They really don't, until like they know that they need it, or they see what they get after it. And then you're not going to redo the building. It's like, well, this design sucked. Let's tear it down and start again. It doesn't happen. You live with it and bitch about it for however long you're in that building, or ever, like, that's, I think, typically how it goes.
Yes.
So in that is, you know, uh, really standing your ground on what you al- allow people to do for free, and what they really need to pay for throughout the entire process of construction.
Yeah, I mean, we got to fight for legitimately what's right, and you gotta charge what you're worth. and you need to be compensated for what you're doing. And that goes across the board, from design to me, to my specialty contractors, everybody involved. You know, you don't go into a restaurant and order a fine meal, and then when the meal gets out, just decide you don't want to pay for it, even though you haven't tried it yet, right? It doesn't. It's foolish to even talk about that, because it doesn't happen anywhere other than in the construction world. So, what do you guys do on your side of the table for, as far as late payments go? Because on my side, you know, luckily, knock on wood, we don't deal with that very often. We have a client now that is consistently late, and it causes a ruffle in the system. But, you know, at the end of the day, as a builder, we have the ability to say, all right, F it, we're done, and just stop. You guys, you know, not for most of it, I would assume your work's already done, and then you're waiting to get the payment.
Yeah, so that's like the problem with a lot of design is that we do it, then we get paid for it, and then they have it, then there's no recourse on it. I mean, you can ultimately do liens and stuff like that. Um, but we don't have like we can't just stop construction and then everyone's like, oh shit, let me get out my checkbook and let's get this rolling again. Um, so there's not like that hard, painful recourse that we have. And ultimately, so through design, it can be a very big problem, or and depending on when it is, right? If it's early enough, you can just not you stop design and like, hey, you haven't paid, we're not going to meet these next milestones, you're not going to get shit from us and till you pay. But frankly, a lot of architects and engineers are pussies and won't actually they won't stand up for them. Like they're it's a scarcity mindset. They're afraid to stand up to the owner. They're afraid to say no. They're afraid that they're going to lose the client. It's like a place of fear. They've been beat down by every contractor, by every owner, and they're just like happy to get paid and do their job and frankly want to be left alone. Like that's how most everybody that I've dealt with operates. They just want to do their job. They don't want any confrontation and they don't deal with it on a daily basis, right? It's not being on a job site and you get made fun of or you know, chided for this, that, or the other thing, right? You don't really grow tough skin because you're head down in a project for months at a time where nobody really bothers you, and then every once in a while you have to deal with problems. So they haven't really grown tough skin to have these conversations with people and really like stand their ground on it. And they don't get taught how to have hard conversations with people without just losing their cool or getting emotional or whatever, because they again it's not done on a daily basis. So it's not that they're at fault, they don't deal with it, they don't get taught it. This isn't a course in school of how to grow some balls. Like that's not what you go through to like deal with this stuff in architecture. And frankly, the people in like on the architecture side who typically lead these things, they're either a bulldog and nobody likes working with them, or they're just a total pushover. And there's no nuance in those two things, right? We've all met the asshole architect or engineer, whoever. And then we've all met the pushover guy. And then, you know, every once in a while you'll get a unicorn that can nuance that conversation of like, hey guys, you really haven't paid us. We're not going to do any more work for you. It's been whatever 2 3 months, like you haven't ponied up for this. Or a lot of it goes through into construction. It's like, hey, we're not going to answer, and then this is where we actually have teeth, is like we're not going to answer another RFI until you actually pay us. We're not going to deal with any submittals, we're not going to deal with anything until you pay us. And then construction gets held up, then you have teeth to everything, right? So um it's nuanced in a lot of this stuff. Frankly, nobody really stands up for it, or it's not known by the team. They don't know how to handle it, right? They don't know how to put the project on hold internally and then convey that correctly to the client. And then, oh, people got put on another project. Your project now got put on the back burner again, like, because then nobody's going to have that conversation with the owner to be like, hey, because you didn't pay, your deadlines now got pushed 2 months. We're not going to keep them because we took people off of them because you didn't pay us. So you're to the back of the line. And then every project manager in the firm is like, well, my project's the most important. And it's like, well, we need to have priority order here of who's actually the most important client. And I know I'm going down like a really long list and a big diatribe here, but it's a big problem internally to these firms where like, every project manager thinks that their project's the most important, and it may or may not be to the firm, and the firm needs to set these like standards, but it's we just do it all and we figure it out, and we try to, minimize who gets pissed off when, and which project manager I don't want to be pissed off. And then, it becomes a big internal problem that doesn't get relayed externally to like, hey, because you didn't pay and because this project went on hold because you couldn't make decisions, like that is not our problem. And then because they don't have that conversation, most A&E firms just eat it and then, still meet the deadlines anyway, because they didn't want to have a conversation to be like, hey, because you can't make decisions, that's not my problem. Again, most contractors are very good at that conversation of like more so than architects and engineers. I, by and large.
For sure. There is definitely that need for nuance, because the way I see it on our side of the table, you either have the complete pushover, who I've dealt with numerous times, the guy who is just so uncomfortable being uncomfortable that he'll never stick up for himself or his company. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the complete and utter asshole cowboy who, at the first sign of a disagreement or anything, it's shut that shit down, pack up your tools, we're gone. And you got to have that middle ground. You called it a unicorn. You got to have something so that you can play both sides of that coin, because there's a slippery slope, right? If I shut down a job site, it's not just like I can click a switch and turn that thing back on tomorrow. It's a process, and it's not fun for anyone involved, especially us. The owner sees it and the owner gets the, oh shit, construction's stopped, but then we got to put all the pieces back together. We got to, wrangle back in the earth worker or the carpenter or whoever. And just like you said, the designers are on another project now. My carpenters are, 2 hours away building somebody else's shit. And there's no good that comes out of that. So pay your damn bills, people.
That's
That
really
would
the
solve
bottom
this.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just be proactive about it and communicate effectively with your owners. You don't have to be a dick about it, but you got to at least let them know where you stand, what the ramifications are, what happens. And then you have to hold to your guns. Right. And I think that's where, a lot of owners just call your bluff and then you cave.
Yeah. I mean, it's not comfortable, right? And people have a really hard time being uncomfortable. It is, to me, that sounds just foolish, because I've grown to actually like it. I'm happy in that place where I'm uncomfortable, and it keeps me on edge and it keeps me sharp. And that's when I perform my best, is when I'm out of that comfort zone. It's when I'm in the comfort zone that I see myself getting, fat, dumb, and happy, and lazy and not doing what I need to do. So I see both sides of it, but you just there's no good way around it. Late payments, there's no good way to handle it. We can assess late fees, that's fine and good, but it doesn't make enough money to make any difference. And really the only option is either you deal with it, you assess a late fee, or you shut the job down. And none of them are fun. So communication, we relish on that. On almost every episode of this show, we somehow touch on communication and being able to have direct, to the point, rip the effing band-aid off conversations, but so few people are able to do that.
I wish it was a simple, answer to it. Um, it's not. It's totally nuanced. You've got to be firm, direct, but, you know, cordial in doing it. Raising your voice doesn't help. And I think the other thing in a lot of this is picking up the phone, right? People don't have the gumption to pick up the phone and have that direct conversation and call with, decision makers on each side and people who can actually make the decision, right? It doesn't make sense to call a foreman or even a superintendent, um, or whatever, right? You need to be, it's got to escalate up to people who can actually make that call, right? You're actually talking to the owner's rep. You're actually talking to the principal in charge of the design firm. You're actually talking to typically like either an account executive or the owner of the general GC firm. Like those are the people that have to have this conversation. So I know some of you are not in the position to do that, but those are ultimately who has to have this conversation with people who can actually do something, who can actually implement change, and then dictate that down through their organization with enough authority to be taken seriously. And it kind of sucks for some of you that are not in that position. I know I got frustrated when I, saw it, but couldn't do anything about it. But you just have to have that internal communication up the chain of, um, this is what's going on, this is what needs to happen, and then they've got to make that call and then do it in email when they're calm and not pissed off and everything else. But that's the other thing is to, as one of the project managers I worked for years ago, is anything that you do not want to come back to you in court, you have a phone call with, and then you put, what you need to in writing to cover your ass. But again, up front, you have a phone call, you get out what you need to. Um, that again, you don't want to come back in court at some point in the future.
1,000% agree, man. It's either a phone call or an in-person conversation on anything controversial or bad. And in our office, it better happen within 24 hours of being notified of it, if not less than that. There's nothing good that comes from waiting. It festers like a bad wound, and you just you hit it right. If you're wanting to be the boss man on a construction company or a design firm, you better be ready to take on those conversations, or else you'll fail. And you better be ready to, you're the last line of defense. You're the one that's got to have the strongest backbone in everybody, and you got to fight for everyone on down the line at your firm, your subcontractors, your everybody on down, relies on you at the top to handle this sort of shit that no one else wants to. But it's real easy to forget that too. So I would just, as a word of encouragement with a little bit of warning to the young bucks out there, wanting to run the show, it's not all sunshine and rainbows up at the top. You got to handle a lot of nasty shit that people don't want to deal with.
And I think one of the things that I, now looking back on my younger days was, when things were a problem, I bitched about them internally and then maybe took them to my boss, or, another principal or whatever. And when it should have gotten to them sooner so that they could handle it, right? They could address it. And instead of me thinking that I talked about it, but I never talked about it to the right person. And I think that's one of these pieces too is, make sure that, bitching's one thing and getting it off your chest, do that in a safe space that's not going to come back to bite you. Um, but on the other side of that is when things are a problem, is make sure that you are talking to somebody that can actually handle it, whether that's, a principal of the firm, on the design side, an owner, a partner, an account executive, whatever that title might be in your construction firm, or, going to the owner's rep to make sure that they can deal with that internally and whatever systems that they have to address on their side. So it's, you can bitch about it. We all bitch about a lot of things, but making sure that you actually address problems with the right people to get them resolved is something I wish I learned sooner.
And I'm going to add the caveat to that, though, to make damn sure they're appropriate problems to be bringing to that person, and not things that could either be handled by yourself or at a lower level. I'm going to leave it right there before I get myself in trouble today.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like, right, like solve what you can solve. But again, we're talking about like, I mean, the whole genesis of this is in payments and in late payments and people not paying their bills. And, what do you do next? And if you find out about it or deal with the accounting department. So, like me as a project manager for given projects, I dealt with accounting on all my projects. And then I dealt with some of them or heard through them and like who is paid, who hasn't paid. And my boss, like the office manager or principal, might not have heard about that, for whatever reason, I don't know. But, when there's 100 projects going on in a firm, they're not aware of like everything across every project. So that's where like, okay, I cannot, as a project manager, deal with payment problems, right? I submit my payment issues or my percent completes to accounting. I hear about it from accounting, and then I have to go to someone else to now deal with like, hey, what do we want to do here? Because these people haven't paid for 6 months, a year, like how do we deal with this and who do I need to talk to? That's where we're talking about. Like I cannot deal as a project manager with those problems. And do that effectively. I could have gone and told the owner that, hey, you haven't paid, but I'm not in a position of authority for the firm to make those type of financial decisions, right? And then the firm might have wanted it to handle it a different way, or they've handled it differently historically than I would do it as a young project manager. So there is also a ton of nuance in this, and make sure you handle the internal politics of especially when it comes to finances. Other things like, R5s aren't issued or whatever. Typically, you're going to take care of that yourself, right? Change orders, like you take care of most of that, like on your projects yourself. So the genesis of this is like in payments and how you want to handle like these catastrophic problems of like not getting paid for the work you're doing.
Nobody wants to work for free. I think that's what we're going to title this show.
Yeah, like what do you want me to put on your paycheck, right? It's not likes and pat on the backs and attaboys, it's
Yep.
dollars and cents.
That's what makes the world go round.
I think those are two big, topics that we could stop for today on. Make sure you're getting paid, make sure that you're sticking to your guns on what's free, what's not, or no charge. It's a better way to phrase everything. It's a no charge, not free. Because again, what you do is provide value. And then at the end of the day, make sure that you do things that are of good quality, of, on time, and for, a reasonable fee. So it's pretty simple.
Sometimes you just got to grow a pair too and handle those problems.
That helps.
Right on, man.
All right, guys. Any other closing thoughts you want to add today, Matt?
I'm just going to keep harping on, guys, share the show. We're growing. We're reaching more people with every week we do this. We need your help to keep that growth pattern going. We're looking for guests to bring on to interview now that hopefully Dillon and I are starting a streak here of it, both of us being on mic at the same time. It's always cool to bring in a third or maybe even a fourth party to join the conversation. So if you want to come on the show, or if you know someone, we got a couple of good suggestions this week via LinkedIn. So we'll have some conversations coming up that we think you guys will like, and just keep sharing it and tune in.
I echo that sentiment, guys. Again, if you have any topics you want us to cover, anything that you want us to do, again, being on different sides of the table from construction, design, now being in software and a vendor, and seeing and hearing from a lot of people across the industry, we're in positions to help you guys. And again, we're not getting paid for this. We do it because we want to, and we enjoy providing solutions to the industry, that we know and love. So again, guys, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, that's this episode of the Construction Corner Podcast.